To conclude the 2024 ACC football season, we have the ACC Championship Game taking place this Saturday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. Central Time, between the 17th ranked 9-3, 7-1 in ACC play Clemson Tigers, led by legendary head coach Dabo Swinney, and the new kid on the block in 8th ranked 11-1, 8-0 in conference play SMU Mustangs, led by head coach Rhett Lashlee, who was a celebrated offensive coordinator before becoming the head coach at SMU, and they have improved every year that he has been with the Mustangs. SMU is in a similar situation to fellow Texas school UT, University of Texas Longhorns, and Big Ten member, now Big Ten member, Oregon. Oregon, new member of the Big Ten, and they're playing for the Big Ten Championship. Texas, new member of the SEC, they're playing for their first ever SEC championship. SMU, new member of the ACC, playing for their first potential ACC championship. It's quite incredible what the 2024 season has brought us in terms of realignment and some of these new matchups, and also a lot of intrigue and remaining controversy. If Clemson beats SMU, there is a good chance that SMU's left out of the college football playoff, and Clemson is certainly not in because of their low ranking if SMU beats them. So I would view this game here, which takes place on ABC, by the way, is streamed on ABC, as a college football playoff elimination game. I do feel like the loser of this game is going to be bumped out, and Alabama will remain at the 11-12 seed in that area. So we're going to talk about this game. I'm going to give you a preview and prediction. SMU's currently a 2.5-point favorite. The line opened up at Clemson -2, though, so a 4.5-point shift. According to ESPN's FPI, though, SMU is given a 53.7% chance to win this game. College Football with Sam is typically a Big Ten-themed channel. We normally cover Big Ten content, but it's conference championship week. There are fewer games to cover, so I am covering all the Power 4 championship games that I can. And I ask that to help us become the best college football channel on YouTube, not just the best Big Ten football channel on YouTube, I ask you to help us by scoring a touchdown for College Football with Sam and doing these 7 things, or at least 6 of them. Someone else can kick the extra point. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, comment your thoughts, your analysis, and prediction down below. You probably see something that I don't and have some useful insight. Also, join our Discord server via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. And those things do a lot. They're free, and they help out the channel quite a bit. Like, share, subscribe, comment, hitting the notification bell, and also please join our Discord server via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment, where we talk college football 24/7, and we would love to have some Clemson and SMU fans in the College Football with Sam Discord server. If you want to support the channel monetarily, check out the Patreon page or the merchandise store via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment, or you could super chat via YouTube's different features in the comment section. But let's talk about this game and look at these teams here. Per the power ratings, SMU is viewed as the superior team compared to Clemson on a neutral field. SMU is viewed as being favored to win by about 2.2 points per FPI, 4.4 points per S&P Plus, and 1.4 points per my potential power index. And whether you look at K-Ford ratings, I imagine it's the same with College Football Nerds, though I don't know their power ratings off the top of my head. I probably should. They do wonderful work there on College Football Nerds. If you've never heard of them before, just type in College Football Nerds in the YouTube search bar and you'll find their channel. It's incredible work what they do. I really, really admire them, and they've inspired the channel. But anyway, beside that point, SMU, you watch them play, you look at the analytics, and I do think they are a, quite frankly, better team than Clemson. They've been more of a complete team this season. I think Clemson is a better team than what they were last year, but last year they were 500 in ACC play, very up and down, extremely inconsistent. They were better on defense last year than they are this year, but they are so much better on the offensive side of the ball. could have beaten South Carolina, maybe in a different universe, could have beaten Louisville as well. For sure, though, they were not beating Georgia, who they got blown out by earlier in the season. And I look at Clemson, and they're more talented than SMU on paper, yes, due to recruiting ratings. But look at how these teams are coached. Look at how they play. I think that SMU is a legitimate team. Now, are they a true national championship contender? We'll have to see. I would honestly lean toward no. But they have been one of the better teams in the ACC this year. Power ratings would say Miami's the best, but they have 2 conference losses. I mean, SMU just messed up to BYU early in the year when they kind of had a QB controversy still going on. And ever since then, they have won games and found ways to win. You see how they've performed relative to their schedule in points per play margin, where they have a 0.264 points per play margin. SMU does. That means per every one of their plays on average, compared to every one of their average opponents' plays, they score 0.264 more points, which nearly a fourth more of a point that you score per play compared to one of your opponents means that you're going to be winning a lot of football games if that's your average points per play margin throughout the season. Their expected points added margin is only 0.18, so they find ways to score, and they score touchdowns, and they're not a team that drives in between the 20s, let's say, but then they make consistent mistakes in the red zone, or they settle for field goals instead of scoring touchdowns, etc. The offense is pretty good. They're also good on defense. Not elite, but they're good on defense, and we'll talk about that in this video. Clemson has a points per play margin of 0.13. They are better on offense than last year. They are more consistent, but again, the defense did take steps back, especially up front. And the offense still sometimes has issues with driving in between the 20s, in between the 10s, like we saw last year, and not coming away with necessary touchdowns to ensure victory. Their expected points added margins is 0.122. So this Clemson team, again, as I've already mentioned, better than last year. Cade Klubnik is top 15 in QBR. Phil Mafah has ran for 1,000 yards. Their offensive line is much better, miles ahead of where it was last season. Not a perfect team, but 11th in game control, 13th in efficiency. They've played the 53rd toughest strength of schedule. SMU's played the 75th toughest strength of schedule. They're 10th in game control, 11th in efficiency. So these teams are relatively even. I mean, SMU has not played a Georgia. No. They have not played a South Carolina, although I would say that while BYU is not as good as South Carolina, BYU is closer to South Carolina, much more so than South Carolina could be to Georgia, or at least the Georgia team that Clemson played. I think Georgia right now, and even a few weeks after they played Clemson, became pretty banged up and not functioning at peak capacity. Clemson's more battle-tested, though. Easily, they've played 2 SEC teams, but they lost in both of those games, got dominated by Georgia. Another physical team they played this year in Louisville dominated them. No one has dominated SMU, and they are a physical football team. So I look at this game as a matchup in the trenches and not really anything else. I've, in other videos, discussed more specific matchups, and I try to discuss specific matchups when I think they're appropriate, because on this channel, we talk about the trenches specifically anyway in a very concise manner toward the end. We mention who I think has the better trench play, and very often that determines who I think is the victorious team, because trenches do matter that much. But I hark on it here because I think these teams are they're pretty similar. And I got some flack on that when I said that Penn State and Oregon are similar. I'm not talking about stylistically in large part, even though there are some similarities, I think, stylistically between Penn State and Oregon. What I more so meant is looking through the power ratings and how they just are analytically, how they accumulate statistics, where they are ranked in statistics, they're similar. That's all I'm trying to say. And as I showed you, these teams are only separated by one position or one spot in game control and fewer than 5 spots in efficiency. Like they're pretty close together, and they're fewer than 5 spots away in FPI as well. And in my potential power ratings, they're very close together. These teams are. And both have performed well in the trenches at times this season, particularly on the offensive line. I mean, SMU has performed well on the O-line. They've only allowed 13 sacks this year. They're averaging 4.5 yards per carry, which isn't crazy, but Brashard Smith, he's averaging 6 yards per carry, 14 rushing touchdowns, over 1,000 rushing yards. SMU has 28 rushing touchdowns this year. Clemson has 23 rushing touchdowns. They're averaging 5.5 yards per carry. Phil Mafah is a 1,000-yard rusher, averaging over 5 yards per carry with 8 rushing touchdowns. Klubnik has done a very good job on the ground this year and has accumulated over 3,000 passing yards. Both quarterbacks have a pass rating that's above 140, and Kevin Jennings also has a QBR that is inside of the top 25, 24th in QBR. Klubnik, I think, is 11th or 12th. These offenses have a capacity to score, and the defense does have talent on it. So how I look at this game is it's going to be a dance in the trenches to determine who wins. SMU is the better rushing defense. They only allow 2.9 yards per carry, 101.5 rushing yards per game, top 10 there. Clemson's outside the top 40 in opponent rushing yards per game, and they're 74th in opponent rushing yards per carry, allowing 4.5. Georgia in the second half could run on them, and in hindsight, that's a red flag because Georgia can't run the football at all. And South Carolina, both started with an S, so I got mixed up there. South Carolina, I mean, Lenora Sellers, he had a lot of plays that, only he or a type of athlete like him could replicate, a lot of kind of magical plays. But South Carolina does have a very limited offensive line. They haven't ran all that well this year. And mostly because of those runs, but also at other times they were able to run the football effectively on Clemson. Pittsburgh was able to run the football effectively on Clemson and shut down Clemson's rushing attack entirely. And Louisville beat Clemson in a physical battle. They dominated Clemson with their running back room and their offensive line. So Clemson has to step it up in the trenches, particularly on run defense. But Clemson, they do have a rushing offense that is coming to play that, again, averages 5.5 yards per carry. That is, 5.1 if you don't count the FCS game that they played. 24th they are in yards per carry. They average 180.5 yards per game. TeamRankings.com, where I data scrape these stats, they don't count the FCS games, which I think is pretty useful. I mean, therefore, Oregon doesn't look as bad as many sites view them because they factor in that FCS game, even though they're clearly not that team. And then a team like Clemson, or maybe an SEC team like Ole Miss at the beginning of the year, who just beat their opponent by over 70 points and averaged over 10 yards per play, they don't get puffed up by those rankings. I think that helps when looking at these teams analytically. SMU's rushing offense only averages 4.2, which is 72nd, and they only average 160.5 yards per game. But Brashard Smith and Kevin Jennings are about as effective on the ground as scramblers and as runners as Clemson is, between Phil Mafah and Cade Klubnik. And Klubnik has been sacked 17 times. Jennings has only been sacked 9 times. They have an ability to escape pressure, escape the pocket. They're mobile. They're good quarterbacks. This is going to be a fascinating matchup here. And I think that when you look at these offenses in greater detail, who's better in the trenches? Well, it's a difficult question. I would ultimately side with Clemson here. They grade out higher at tackle, and they're about the same at center and guard. But the fact that they're graded similarly, and Clemson has played, South Carolina's D-line, did pretty well against them, played Georgia's, didn't do that well. But again, that was week 1. Things can change. They had some new staffers in the trenches in particular, and it's a tough game to open up with. I think that I would say Clemson. If I had to lean one way or the other, I'd say Clemson's better at center and guard. At running back, it's difficult because I think that in part, Clemson's rushing attack is a product almost entirely of their offensive line. Phil Mafah, good running back. I don't think he's a great running back. I would probably go with Brashard Smith over Phil Mafah at running back if I had to make the decision. It's a push, though. And at quarterback, I don't know. I think that Klubnik has been more consistent throughout the year. 29 touchdown passes, 5 picks. Jennings, 19 touchdown passes, 7 interceptions. He had that one really, and I mean really, bad game against Duke where he threw 3 picks and had fumbles, had a QBR of 10.2. But outside of that game, and also the BYU game where he filled in after Preston Stone, I think, initially started, he's had QBRs that at worst are in the mid-60s, at best are in the 90s or high 80s. I don't know. I'm going to leave that as a push, and you let me know down below who you'd rather have at quarterback. I don't know between Cade, Klubnik, and Kevin Jennings who I'd rather have. But I do think Clemson's offensive line is better. Tristan Lay, Colin Sadler, Ryan Lithicum, others on that line compared to a strong offensive line with Ja'Kai Clark, Logan Parr, P.J. Williams, and others. But I'd prefer Clemson there. I think that at wide receiver, you give that to SMU. R.J. Maryland, out for the entire season. Matthew Hibner, former Michigan player, he's been doing pretty well, substituting in, but I do like Jake Briningstool at tight end, so I give tight end to Clemson. You look at these defenses. We already talked about how Clemson has struggled a bit at stopping the run, and you look at these defenses overall here. Just take a little bit of a closer look. SMU leads Clemson in the majority of scoring offense that I was looking at. They lead Clemson in the majority of scoring defensive categories too. So even if I made a mistake looking at the wrong statistics, that wouldn't have been wrong at all. They're top 25 in opponent points per game, opponent yards per point, and opponent points per play. Clemson's 25th in opponent points or yards per point, but they're outside the top 30 in points per game and points per play. But a huge part of that could be that, they played Georgia in week 1 and SMU didn't, because Georgia's offense, I think at the beginning of the year, and recently it's gotten better, but in September and November, at least late November, the Georgia offense was much better than it was in October, late September against Alabama, and also early November, when they played Ole Miss on the road and couldn't get anything going outside of the fumble recovery for the short touchdown drive. I like Clemson better at corner, a lot, actually. But I do believe that SMU there, is better on the defensive line, and I also think they are better at safety. I mean, SMU has done a better job of stopping the run. Their D-line early in the year was something that was considered a strength, if I remember correctly. Clemson's, I thought, was going to be stronger than it is now, but I did believe with all the departures up front that Clemson was likely going to regress to the mean, especially with their recruiting and development and overall performance since Brent Venables left after losing some of their star players up front. And they have. I think that Clemson up front, when you look at their defense, their sack percentage, 7.07%, is 43rd. SMU's higher, 7.82. We already talked about the rushing defense. The defensive line for Clemson, I think, is good, above average, but I don't think it's great. It's certainly not elite. And Barrett Carter, excellent linebacker, but he is just one player along with Peter Woods and TJ Parker and some of those players. That defensive tackle room, I think in particular, is an area with some weakness. I think SMU's better up front. Linebacker, SMU's been pretty good there. I think they have better depth, but I think Clemson is the best individual player at linebacker. I think SMU is better in the trenches, just slightly though. It's mostly because of Clemson's underperforming defensive line. They cannot stop the run to save their life. They can't. The Louisville game showed that. If you have a quarterback with mobility and can keep Clemson's defense honest in that regard, you can run on them. SMU does have that. Of course, that doesn't factor into overall trench performance, but they are shaky there. And the O-line, well improved. I loved the Matt Luke hire. I thought it was one of the best hires in the 2024 preseason. That's just one side of the trenches. And Clemson, depth-wise and recruiting-wise and developmental-wise, is still far worse off than it was, let's say, 5 years ago or 6 or 7 years ago. I do like SMU better in the trenches, and I also prefer them on special teams where they are ranked higher per ESPN special teams efficiency. Coaching-wise, defensively, these staffs, I think, are both good. They also have their limitations. Everywhere else, though, I would prefer SMU. I think Rhett Lashlee right now is a better head coach than Dabo Swinney. I think SMU is better developed. They're better conditioned. They're stronger. They're more physical. And I also like their offensive staff. I think Garrett Riley is an awesome offensive coordinator, and I really like Matt Luke on the O-line. But what Rhett Lashlee and his SMU offense are doing with the players they have is quite impressive. I think SMU and Clemson both have some of the nation's better offensive staffs. And I wonder with, and I don't want to sound this way, but like with other teams, other jobs that are in better conferences now because the ACC does not have the same pay grade or payouts or reputation as the other conferences. Do we see like Matt Luke or the Clemson and SMU offensive coordinators leave for better jobs in those conferences? I imagine Garrett Riley doesn't leave with the salary he has. And I know that Clemson pays their assistants pretty well. But it's something to ponder. I think that both of these staffs overall, from an assistant coaching perspective, are pretty good, solid at the worst, maybe elite or near elite at the best. But I do think SMU is a coaching edge overall. And that, combined with everything else we talked about, pushes me to pick them to win. My power rating says that SMU is going to win by 1.4 points, just barely win. I agree that SMU is going to win, and I'm going to go a little bit more aggressive. I think they win 31-21. I think that Clemson will have an easier time scoring on SMU's defense than South Carolina's. I kind of think that's a no-duh. But SMU is not as limited on offense as South Carolina is. They have a better offensive line, and they're more balanced of a football team than South Carolina is. I don't know if SMU is better than South Carolina, but I do know that playing in the ACC Championship Game, even though it may have a Clemson home bend to it, is going to be an easier task than playing in Death Valley, which has one of the best home win percentage records of recent memory, even in some of the more recent down years of Clemson. So I think SMU is going to win. I think they're going to cover. 31-21 is my score prediction. Thank you all so much for watching. Remember to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. Thanks to Crash2488 and Brasco Rascal for being Heisman members, also for Connell OH, and Chris Lane, Ismar, and Tyler Nye for being All-American members, and John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, Joshua Jorgensen, and Will Loftus for being all-conference members. Make sure to check out my Patreon page, merchandise store, and Discord server via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. Have a great day, everyone. Go Tigers, and go Mustangs.